All right, so we stopped at the line with the star. She didn't understand at all when Nemo fell ill. Or maybe she couldn't let the fact in, because she just loved her little brother so much. Maybe that. It happened in the night, as she held him close. Omachias felt his small body turn heated and molten, soft and fiery with the fever's rage. He was red, quiet, and limp in her arms when Dede woke, and Omachias held him close, gently bathed his face with a bit of snow, hoping that he would grin at her, hoping that, again, he would be healthy and sweet. She didn't want the house, the sickness, to suck him in, too. It couldn't. She wouldn't let it. But as soon as she dozed off, Dede lifted little Nemo away. She woke immediately, crawled to the door of the lodge, and then, as Dede walked toward the silent cabin with the tiniest thread of smoke coming from the chimney, Omakia saw him stagger. He didn't fall, but she knew that from that misstep that Dede was ill, that he'd hidden his sickness, that he was going into the cabin with Nemo, never to return. Omachias acted without hesitation. She put out the little fire in the Birchbark House. If they were all to die together, then let it be so. She would not stay outside alone and away from those she loved. No, not even if it meant her life. She followed Nemo inside. The air in the cabin was thick with the stink of disease, but the hearth was warm. Nokomis had the sick ones arranged in their bedding, blankets pulled neatly up to their chins, mats clean on the floor, all around the fire. Although Nokomis sat next to Mamma in a stupor of exhaustion and did not at first speak to Omachias, she nodded encouragingly at Angeline, who slept easily now, her fever broken, her hands limp on her blanket. Omachias crouched beside her. That's when she saw that the beautiful face of her sister was covered with ugly sores and vivid lumps, and her mouth, when she opened it to breathe, showed that her gums bled painfully and stained her teeth red. Her hair was caught in a thick mat, but she was alive. Her breath moved steadily in and out. Mamma slept, also covered with sores, unconscious and still in the depth of her danger. Pinch kept tossing off his covers or dragging at Mamma's, with a weary, loving, unthinking movement that showed she had done this thousands of times before. Nokomis replaced the blankets, held a tin cup of water to Pinch's lips, trickled a little water between Mamma's lips, then Angeline's. Dede slumped over by the fire. She did not disturb except to lower him to the earth. Motioning to Omachias, she indicated Nemo, who was trembling now. His tiny arms and legs moved jerkily as the heat in his body increased and increased until he had not the strength to even cry. "Keep holding him," said Nokomis tenderly, giving Nemo to Omachias, seating them by the fire. She placed her dry, old, cool hand on the back of Omachias's head. "Just keep holding him," she said again. And so Omachias did. She held Nemo through the night, dozing with him, waking when he thrashed, cleaning him, bathing with cool water, his forehead and his tiny, straining, bony chest. He clenched his clenched hands and his beautiful feet. She held him when he melted into a troubled sleep, when his breath rasped, when his cough deepened, when he cried and cried until his voice was gone. She held him when he grew still and quiet, too quiet, when his fever came back. One day passed, another blurred, and still she held her little brother, held him close in her arms. She held him as he looked mysteriously into her face, his eyes huge. She held him when he spat up blood, when he whimpered for Ondeg, who sat high up in the roof beams, head underneath his wing. She held him through another night, held him when his chest went drum tight and he struggled for breath, held him when he drew that breath deep from the heart. She held him when he died. She held him close. She didn't know exactly when his life went, except that Ondig croaked 3 times, longingly, as though for his playmate. Then Omachias knew that something had changed. Her little brother's body no longer warmed her with its heat. They were the same temperature, and then he was colder. Still, she did not let him go. Nokomis had to take him from her arms, and when she did, Omachias fell down on the blanket, arms still held in the cradle shape of her brother, and knew nothing all that day. It was night when she woke. Opening her eyes, she knew at once what had happened, and the bleak knowledge made her shut her eyes again. Maybe, almost, she wished that she were sick too, that she could join him. For Nokomis had said that the Ojibwa must walk a path that leads out of this life into the next. Since Niwo couldn't walk very well yet, who would carry him when he got tired, when he fell? Who would make sure he was fed in the other world? Who would make him toy man dolls to dance? Who would care for him when he was lost? The answer, once she had risen, once she began working with Nokomis to care for her family, was a sad answer. Old Tallow brought the news later that day. She set 4 snared rabbits down near the door, then waited to speak. "Tensnow is gone," she said. On the road to the next world, surely, she and Niwa would meet, thought Omachias, tears blinding her as she tipped water to her father's lips. Surely Tensnow would take hold of Niwo's hand, swing him up in her arms, carry him along past the rough spots and danger to the place where they would be safe. Old Tallow took the horn spoon from Omachias and ordered her to lie down, to sleep. She made Nokomis lie down as well, in the corner with her grandchildren. "You two rest now. Go on, or I'll take a stick to you." Her voice was fierce, rasping, angry and strong. Nokomis obeyed her, sank into the skins, slept before her head touched the back of her blanket. Omachias was glad to do the same. Old Tallow then proceeded to work. She built up the fire, high, to a greater heat than Nokomis had dared, for she knew she could chop more wood as needed. She brought a new kettle of water in, skinned her rabbits by the light of the fire, and boiled them for a nourishing soup. She cleaned every corner, the way she never cleaned her own house. She left her dogs to run wild and tended every need, cared for the humans she loved, and although she would never admit it, loved even more than she loved her dogs. Old Tallow's work helped them, but the next day she left once more to hunt. Nokomis, weakened, though she wasn't ill. Omachias alone was left to tend to the sick ones. She had to keep the fire going, haul the water, cover them, bathe them down, comfort them when they were restless. She hardly slept an hour at a time. First one needed her, then the other, then a third, the first again. There was no stopping. Their cries were pitiful. When the terrible itching that gave the disease its name started, Omachias wrapped their hands with cloth, bit down their fingernails, anything to keep them from scarring themselves. The itching nearly drove them from their minds. Pinch was worse, and he'd weakened so badly that Nokomis was afraid for him. Night and day, one or the other sat with him and did not let go of his hand for fear he would run to the land of the spirits. Even Ondeg seemed to sense how close Pinch was to death. Ondeg perched near Pinch, as though keeping guard. Every time Pinch slipped too far away, the bird croaked, "Gago, Pinch." One stubborn eye flared open, and Pinch fixed his annoyed little boy glare upon the bird. He was mad, but he got well. "Gago, Pinch, Gago, Gago," called Ondeg. What he really meant was, "Don't go. Stay here." One night, Omachias woke to see Day trying to rise to his feet. In the dim light of a low fire, she saw him throw off his blankets. He tried to stagger outside. She knew that was certain death. Many died of this sickness when they became so fevered that they lost their minds, threw off blankets, and walked outside to freeze. "Please, Day," she said, to draw him back. He sank onto all fours, but kept crawling determinedly toward the door, groaning hair wild. His eyes did not know her, and his face was frightened. He clawed at the door, fell to his knees, got up on his knees. This time he was so determined that Omachias knew there was no way she could save him from going outside. He was too strong for her, even in his sickness. Gawin onjira, she said. I'm sorry. Raising a block of wood high, she brought it down on his head with all her strength. He crumpled to the ground. Omachias sobbed as she dragged his blankets to him and covered him. He was too heavy to drag near the fire. For a long time she kneeled next to him, praying for him to live. She loved him, her Day. What would they do without him? Back in her own blankets, she immediately sank into a fierce oblivion. When she woke, it was morning. Instantly, she remembered the night before. Was her father dead? Had her blow killed him? Fear gripped her as she crept to his side, put her hand to his lips. His breath came evenly. He seemed a little better, even, than the day before. As the morning went on, he sipped broth for the first time, opened his eyes. My little frog, he smiled, closing his eyes again, this time to sleep comfortably. You could bring down a bear with your strength in your club. His fever was broken at last. Omachias's constant attention brought the little family through the first part of the illness's danger. One by one, they improved, all because of her careful nursing. Later, it was the vaccine of the Reverend Hall, fetched from the mainland, that guarded the rest of the Ojibwa, who had been exposed and who survived the smallpox of 1847. 18 Ojibwa died of the disease, and one tried to kill himself by other means. That man was Fishtail. No one had understood it of him, but his wife was everything. When Tensnow left him, Fishtail would not leave her body. He slashed his arms and was found in the blanket beside her, half alive. He survived, but once he had the strength, he cut off his long, thick, splendid hair. He buried it with the sweet woman who was called Tensnow, not because her own skin was white, nor because she had much of anything to do with snow at all, but because the kind assurance of her nature had reminded her neighbors of the way the deep snow covers and forgives all it touches when it falls.